I never imagined I'd be here, alone in a run-down motel room, laying bare my mistakes for strangers on the internet. Yet, here I am, my life in ruins, my family shattered, all because of one mistake I made 16 years ago. Now, karma has come to collect its due, and it's not holding back. It all started with a text message from my daughter, Lily. "Mom, we need to talk. It's about the DNA test results." My heart stopped. Panic gripped me as I realized the secret I'd buried for over a decade had finally surfaced. The family I'd built on fragile lies was about to come crashing down. But to understand how we got here, I need to go back to the beginning. 16 years ago, my marriage to Tom was crumbling. We were high school sweethearts, married young, and had a son, Jimmy, by the time we were barely adults. Life was hard. Tom worked long hours trying to build a future for us, while I stayed home with Jimmy, overwhelmed and isolated. That's when Donald, Tom's best friend and best man at our wedding, stepped in. At first, his kindness felt like a lifeline. He brought groceries, babysat Jimmy, and provided the adult conversation I desperately needed. Then, one lonely evening, with wine flowing and laughter easing my exhaustion, I made the worst mistake of my life. Donald and I crossed a line. It was a one-time thing, but a few weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. The timing left no doubt. This wasn't Tom's child. Terrified of losing my family, I lied. I told Tom the baby was his and prayed no one would question it. Our daughter, Lily, was born, and by some miracle, she looked enough like me to avoid suspicion. Tom adored her, and for years, I buried the guilt, convincing myself that I'd made the right choice for everyone involved. Fast forward to last month, when Lily excitedly took a DNA test for a school project. Despite my attempts to dissuade her, she was determined. When the results came back, revealing that she and Jimmy were only half-siblings, Lily confronted me. Cornered, I confessed the truth and begged her to keep it between us. But secrets, once uncovered, have a way of destroying everything. Lily, hurt and confused, lashed out. She told her friends about my betrayal, not realizing Tom would overhear. In that moment, the life I had worked so hard to protect was irreparably broken. Tom demanded the truth, a paternity test confirmed his worst fears, and his devastation turned to anger. He kicked both Lily and me out, declaring he wanted nothing more to do with us. Jimmy sided with Tom, refusing even to speak to us. And just like that, my family was gone. But the fallout didn't stop there. Sylvia, Donald's wife, found out and unleashed her fury. My parents turned their backs on me, and the entire town seemed to revel in my downfall. Donald disappeared, leaving me and Lily to face the mess alone. Now, as I sit in this dingy motel room, I'm forced to confront the wreckage of my decisions. The truth is, one mistake spiraled into a catastrophe, and the consequences of my actions are crushing. But for Lily's sake, I have to find a way to pick up the pieces. 16 years ago, my secret felt like a survival choice, an act of desperation to preserve my family. Now, it's a wrecking ball, smashing through everything I thought I was protecting. After Tom kicked us out, Lily and I landed in a cheap motel. The room smelled of mildew and regret, with sagging beds and peeling wallpaper. Lily was devastated, oscillating between anger, guilt, and despair. She blamed herself for taking the DNA test, for saying too much to her friends, for inadvertently shattering our family. Yet, she also blamed me, for lying, for involving her in my betrayal, for leaving her to deal with the fallout of a mess she didn't create. "You lied to everyone, Mom," she snapped one evening. Her voice was low but sharp, the hurt in her tone unmistakable. "You made me live a lie my whole life. How could you do that to me?" What could I say? How do you explain the crushing weight of a bad decision to a teenager whose world is crumbling? All I could offer was the truth, stripped of excuses. "I was scared, Lily," I said quietly. "Your dad and I were in a bad place. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought telling him the truth would destroy our family. I thought I was protecting you and Jimmy. But you weren't protecting us," she shot back, tears streaming down her face. "You were protecting yourself. And now look at what's happened." She wasn't wrong. I had convinced myself for years that the lie was for the best, but the truth was undeniable now. I'd hurt everyone I loved. Lily wasn't the only one lashing out. News of our family drama spread like wildfire. Sylvia made sure of that. Donald's wife, enraged by his betrayal, showed up at the motel and screamed at me in the parking lot for all to hear. She called me a homewrecker and worse, her fury so loud and raw that half the motel guests came out to watch. "Do you know what you've done to my family?" she yelled, her mascara streaked from tears. 16 years of lies, Amelia. 16 years, and now my husband is gone. He packed up and left because of you. She wasn't wrong, either. Donald had disappeared the moment Sylvia confronted him, leaving me and Lily to face the fallout alone. And Sylvia wasn't content with just yelling. She made good on her threats to ruin me, spreading the story to everyone in town. Soon, our private shame was public fodder. My phone buzzed constantly, filled with messages I dreaded to read. Old friends sent curt texts, demanding explanations or cutting ties altogether. My parents called, not to console me, but to berate me for disgracing the family. Even strangers reached out, offering their unsolicited opinions on what a terrible person I was. Lily's pain deepened as our family's collapse became a public spectacle. She retreated further into herself, blaming me for everything. One night, after another terse exchange, she said something that cut me to my core. "Sometimes I wish I'd never been born," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Then none of this would have happened." I froze, the weight of her words like a punch to the gut. "Don't say that, Lily," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "You are not a mistake. None of this is your fault. I love you more than anything." But love felt insufficient in the face of her pain. She was a teenager carrying the burden of my choices, and I didn't know how to fix it. As if things couldn't get worse, Lily's hurt boiled over one evening when she received a message from Jimmy. His words were brief but cold. "I don't want to talk to you or Mom. You've both destroyed everything." She crumpled at the news, her sobs echoing in the tiny room. I held her, wishing I could take her pain away, but knowing I was the reason for it. Jimmy had always been her rock, her protector, and now he wanted nothing to do with her. In my darkest moments, I wondered if I could ever make things right. Tom, my high school sweetheart, the man I'd once loved so deeply, was filing for divorce. He wanted custody of Jimmy and was petitioning to have his name removed from Lily's birth certificate. The rejection was like a knife twisting in my heart. One day, I received a visit I wasn't expecting, Donald. He showed up at the motel, looking haggard and remorseful. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "For everything. For what I did to you, to Lily, to Tom. I wasn't in the mood for apologies." "Sorry doesn't fix anything, Donald," I snapped. "You vanished when things got hard. Lily needed you, and you weren't there." "I know," he admitted, running a hand through his disheveled hair. I panicked. "But I'm here now. I want to help. Legally, financially, whatever you need." Lily overheard his offer and exploded. "I don't want your money," she shouted. "I don't want you. You're not my dad. Tom is. And you're the reason he doesn't want me anymore." Her words left Donald speechless. For all his flaws, I could see the pain in his eyes as he realized the damage he'd caused. He left soon after, promising to stay in touch, though I doubted he would. But Donald's visit wasn't the worst news. Sylvia, fueled by vengeance, was threatening to take the story to the media. The thought of our private disaster becoming public was terrifying, but Lily surprised me with her response. "Let her," she said, her voice steadier than I expected. "If the truth is going to come out, I'd rather we tell it ourselves." Her maturity floored me. She was right. We couldn't control the gossip, but we could control how the story was told. Together, we decided to reach out to a local news station to share our side. The night before the interview, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Would this help? Or would it just make things worse? My guilt and fear were almost unbearable. But as I glanced over at Lily, curled up on her bed, I realized I had no choice. For her sake, I had to try. The interview was the hardest thing I've ever done. Sitting in that dingy motel room, facing the news crew's bright lights, I laid my soul bare. Lily sat beside me, clutching my hand for support, but I could feel her trembling. Across from us, Claire, the reporter, leaned forward with a sympathetic yet probing expression. I started with the affair, how it happened, how one mistake had spiraled into 16 years of deception. My voice cracked as I admitted my fears, my cowardice, and my selfishness. I thought I was protecting my family, I said, tears streaming down my face. But all I did was build a house of cards, and now it's come crashing down. Lily spoke next. Her voice was shaky but determined as she explained her side. I didn't ask for any of this, she said, her eyes welling up. I thought I knew who I was, who my family was. But now everything feels like a lie. Donald arrived halfway through, clearly nervous but trying to look composed. He apologized again and acknowledged his role in the betrayal. I thought keeping quiet was the best thing for everyone, he said. But all I did was hurt the people I cared about the most. The hardest part came at the end, when Claire asked the question I had been dreading. If Tom and Jimmy are watching this, she said gently, what would you say to them? My throat tightened, and for a moment I couldn't speak. Then, gathering every ounce of courage, I looked directly into the camera. Tom, Jimmy, I said, my voice breaking. I'm sorry. I know I've broken your trust in ways that may never heal. But I love you. I always have. And I hope someday you can find it in your hearts to forgive me, not for my sake, but for the family we were. For Lily. She needs you, and so do I. Lily, tears streaming, added her plea. Dad, Jimmy, please come back. I know I messed up, but you're my family. You're my dad, no matter what. And Jimmy, you're my big brother. I need you. I miss you. Please, please come home. The segment aired the next evening, and watching it felt surreal. Lily and I huddled together on the motel bed, clutching each other as we waited for the phone to ring. But it didn't. Hours passed, and still, no word came from Tom or Jimmy. Lily tried to stay strong, but I could see the disappointment in her eyes. Maybe they didn't see it, she whispered, more to herself than to me. I nodded, though deep down, I feared the worst, that they had seen it and decided we weren't worth the effort. Then, 2 days later, there was a knock at the door. I froze. Lily sat up straight, her eyes wide. Mom, she whispered. What if it's Dad? My heart pounded as I approached the door. When I looked through the peephole, my breath caught in my throat. It was Tom. I opened the door slowly, unsure of what to expect. He looked exhausted, his eyes bloodshot, his shoulders slumped, but he was here. Can I come in? He asked, his voice rough. Of course, I said, stepping aside. As Tom entered, his eyes landed on Lily. She stood frozen for a moment before rushing toward him. Dad, she cried, throwing her arms around him. For a moment, he didn't move, but then he wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly. Hey, kiddo, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Watching them together, I felt a flicker of hope, though I knew this was far from over. Tom turned to me, his expression unreadable. We need to talk, he said. We sat down at the small motel table while Lily perched on the edge of the bed, watching nervously. I saw the interview, Tom began. Jimmy showed it to me. I nodded, waiting for him to continue. I've had a lot of time to think, he said, his voice steady but strained. About everything. About our marriage, about Lily, about all the lies. He paused, taking a deep breath. What you did, Amelia, it was unforgivable. You betrayed me, you lied to me for 16 years, and you let me believe a lie about my own daughter. Each word was like a dagger to my heart, but I stayed silent, knowing he needed to say this. But, he continued, glancing briefly at Lily, I've also realized something. DNA doesn't define a family. Love does. And I've loved Lily since the day she was born. Lily let out a soft sob, her hands flying to her mouth. I'm not saying I forgive you, Tom said, turning back to me. And I'm not saying we can go back to how things were. But I'm willing to try. For Lily's sake. A wave of relief washed over me. Thank you, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. I don't deserve a second chance, but I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Tom nodded, though his expression remained guarded. I've withdrawn the petition to remove my name from Lily's birth certificate, he said. She's my daughter, no matter what. And I want her to come home. Lily's sobs grew louder as she ran to hug him again. Thank you, Dad, she cried. I'm so sorry for what I said. You're my dad, and you always will be. Tom held her close, his own tears finally breaking through. "I love you, kiddo," he murmured. As they embraced, I stayed in my seat, silently watching the man I had hurt so deeply still find it in his heart to love the daughter who wasn't biologically his. Tom turned to me one last time. "We'll figure out counseling," he said. "For Lily, and for us, if we can salvage anything. But I'm taking this one step at a time." I nodded, knowing I had no right to push for more. "That's all I can ask for." With that, he stood and led Lily out of the motel room. As the door closed behind them, I sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by a mix of relief, grief, and hope. The motel room was silent after Tom and Lily left, the stillness pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. My daughter was finally back with her father, where she belonged, but I was alone, left to reckon with the wreckage of my choices. It felt strange, bittersweet. Tom hadn't forgiven me, he'd made that clear, but the door wasn't completely closed. There was a flicker of hope, a small possibility that counseling might lead us somewhere better. But for now, I had to accept that things would never go back to the way they were. The next morning, I woke early and started making plans. I couldn't afford to wallow in self-pity anymore. I needed a job, a place to live, and a way to rebuild my life. I owed that to Lily, to myself, and maybe, someday, even to Tom. The first step was finding a therapist, not just for me, but for Lily too. She'd been through so much, and I couldn't let her carry the weight of this alone. I also reached out to a few friends, hoping at least one of them would look past the scandal and offer a place to crash. Most didn't respond, but one old friend, Mary, invited me for coffee. Sitting across from her, I felt a wave of gratitude I hadn't expected. Mary didn't excuse my actions, but she listened without judgment, offering practical advice instead of moral lectures. "You've made a mess, Amelia," she said bluntly. "But you're trying to clean it up. That's all you can do right now." Her words stuck with me as I left the cafe and returned to the motel. I couldn't erase the past or undo the damage I'd caused. But I could take small steps forward, one at a time. Over the next few weeks, I started piecing things together. I found a part-time job at a local diner, saved enough for a tiny apartment, and began therapy sessions with Lily. The progress was slow, sometimes agonizingly so, but there were moments of light. Lily and Tom reconnected little by little, and even Jimmy started replying to her texts, though he still wouldn't talk to me. As for Tom, he stayed true to his word about counseling. Our sessions were tense, filled with anger, tears, and long silences, but they were a start. I knew it would take years, if not a lifetime, to earn back even a fraction of his trust, but I was willing to try. One day, after a particularly raw session, Tom said something that stuck with me. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," he admitted. "But I'll never stop loving Lily. And for her sake, I'm willing to try." That willingness, that small opening, was enough for now. The fallout from the interview eventually faded, replaced by other town scandals and gossip. People still whispered when they saw me, but I stopped caring as much. I had more important things to focus on: my daughter, my therapy, my tentative steps toward rebuilding a life from the ruins. I know I'll never fully escape the consequences of my actions. The pain I caused, the trust one broke, will always be part of my story. But it doesn't have to define me, or Lily. As I sit here in my tiny apartment, writing this with the hum of the city outside, I feel something I haven't felt in months: hope. Hope that someday, my relationships with Tom and Jimmy might heal. Hope that Lily will grow stronger, wiser, and more resilient than I ever was. I'm not naive enough to think everything will magically fall into place. Life isn't that kind. But I've learned that even in the darkest moments, there's a way forward, however painful, however slow. And for now, that's enough. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel, where I share more personal stories and lessons about navigating life's toughest challenges. Let's grow and heal together.